1 Kings Chapter 19. And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and all about how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. And Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, The gods do so to me and even more, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like the life of one of them. And because he was afraid, he rose up and went away for his life, and he came to Beer-sheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his attendant there. And he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a certain broom shrub, and he requested for himself that he might die and said, It is enough, now, O Jehovah, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. And he lay down and slept under the broom shrub. And suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, Rise up and eat. And he looked, and there at his head was a cake, baked on hot stones, and a jar of water. And he ate and drank, and lay down again. And the angel of Jehovah came again the second time and touched him and said, Rise up and eat, for the journey is too great for you. And he rose up and ate and drank, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb the mount of God. And there he went into a cave and lodged there. And at that time the word of Jehovah came to him, and he said to him, What are you doing here, Elijah? And he said, I have been very jealous for Jehovah the God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and slain your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. And he said, Go out, and stand upon the mountain before Jehovah. And suddenly Jehovah passed by, and a great, strong wind rent the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces before Jehovah. Jehovah was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. Jehovah was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. Jehovah was not in the fire. And after the fire, a gentle, quiet voice. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And then a voice came to him and said, What are you doing here, Elijah? And he said, I have been very jealous for Jehovah the God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and slain your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. And Jehovah said to him, Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you come there, anoint Hazael as king over Syria. And Jehu the son of Nimshi you shall anoint as king over Israel, and Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah you shall anoint as prophet in your place. And him who escapes the sword of Hazael, Jehu will kill, and him who escapes the sword of Jehu, Elisha will kill. Yet I have left myself 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed unto Baal and every mouth that has not kissed him. And he went from there and found Elisha the son of Shaphat. And he was plowing with 12 yokes before him, and he was with the 12th. And Elijah went over to him and threw his mantle upon him. And he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, Let me kiss my father and my mother, and I will follow you. And he said to him, Go back again, for what have I done to you? And he returned from him and took the yoke of oxen and slaughtered them, and he boiled their flesh with the implements of the oxen and gave it to the people, and they ate. And he rose up and went after Elijah and ministered to him. 1 Kings Chapter 20. And Ben-Hadad the king of Syria assembled all his army together, and there were 32 kings with him, as well as horses and chariots. And he went up and besieged Samaria and fought against it. And he sent messengers to the city to Ahab the king of Israel and said to him, Thus says Ben-Hadad, Your silver and your gold are mine, your best wives and children also are mine. And the king of Israel answered and said, As you say, my lord the king, I and all that I have are yours. And the messengers came again and said, Thus speaks Ben-Hadad, saying, I sent word to you, saying, You shall give me your silver and your gold and your wives and your children. But tomorrow at this time I will send my servants to you, and they will search your house and your servants' houses, and whatever is pleasant in your sight, they will put in their hand and take away. And the king of Israel called all the elders of the land and said, Look now, and see how this man seeks trouble, for he sent word to me for my wives and my children and my silver and my gold, and I did not deny him. And all the elders and all the people said to him, Do not listen to him, nor shall you give consent. And he said to the messengers of Ben-Hadad, Tell my lord the king, all that you sent for to your servant at the first I will do, but this thing I cannot do. And the messengers departed and brought word back to him. And Ben-Hadad sent word to him and said, The gods do so to me and even more, if the dust of Samaria will provide even a handful for all the people who follow me. And the king of Israel answered and said, Tell him, Let not him who puts on his armor boast like him who takes it off. And when he heard this word, as he and the kings in the tents were drinking, he said to his servants, Set yourselves in position. And they set themselves in position against the city. Then at that moment a certain prophet approached Ahab the king of Israel and said, Thus says Jehovah, Have you seen all this great multitude? I am now delivering it into your hand today, and you will know that I am Jehovah. And Ahab said, Through whom? And he said, Thus says Jehovah, through the attendants of the leaders of the provinces. Then he said, Who shall begin the battle? And he said, You. And he numbered the attendants of the leaders of the provinces, and they were 232, and after them he numbered all the people, all the children of Israel, 7,000. And they went out at noon, and Ben-Hadad was drinking himself drunk in the tents, he and the kings, the 32 kings who helped him. And the attendants of the leaders of the provinces went out first. And Ben-Hadad sent out men, and they told him, saying, Some men have come forth from Samaria. And he said, If they have come forth for peace, take them alive, or if they have come forth for war, take them alive. But these had come forth from the city, the attendants of the leaders of the provinces and the army that followed them. And each man struck down his opponent, and the Syrians fled, and Israel pursued them. And Ben-Hadad the king of Syria escaped on a horse with the horsemen. And the king of Israel went forth and struck down the horses and chariots, and he struck down the Syrians with a great slaughter. And the prophet approached the king of Israel and said to him, Go, strengthen yourself, and consider and see what you should do, for at the return of the year the king of Syria will come up against you. And the servants of the king of Syria said to him, Their gods are gods of the mountains, therefore they were stronger than we. But if we fight against them in the plain, we will surely be stronger than they. So do this, remove the kings, each from his place, and put governors in their places. And you number an army, like the army that you lost, horse for horse and chariot for chariot, and we will fight against them in the plain. We will surely be stronger than they. And he listened to their voice and did so. And at the return of the year Ben-Hadad numbered the Syrians and went up to Aphek to fight with Israel. And the children of Israel were numbered and supplied with food, and they went to meet them. And the children of Israel encamped before them like two little flocks of goats, but the Syrians filled the land. And the man of God approached and spoke to the king of Israel and said, Thus says Jehovah, because the Syrians have said, Jehovah is a God of the mountains, but he is not a God of the valleys, I will deliver all this great multitude into your hand, and you will know that I am Jehovah. And they camped, one army against the other, for 7 days. Then on the 7th day the battle was joined, and the children of Israel struck down 100,000 footmen of the Syrians in 1 day. And the rest fled to Aphek, into the city, and the wall fell on the 27,000 of them who were left. And Ben-Hadad fled and came into the city, hiding from one room to another. And his servants said to him, Look now, we have heard that the kings of the house of Israel are merciful kings. We beg you, let us put sackcloth on our loins and ropes upon our heads, and go out to the king of Israel. Perhaps he will preserve your life. And they girded sackcloth on their loins and ropes on their heads, and came to the king of Israel and said, Your servant Benhadad says, I beg you, preserve my life. And he said, Is he still alive? He is my brother. And the men were looking for some sign and quickly caught what came from him, and they said, Benhadad is your brother. And he said, Go and bring him. And Benhadad came forth to him, and he brought him up into the chariot. And Benhadad said to him, The cities that my father took from your father I will restore, and you shall make streets for yourself in Damascus, as my father made in Samaria. And I, said Ahab, will send you away with this treaty. So he made a treaty with him and sent him away. And a certain one of the sons of the prophets said to his companion by the word of Jehovah, Strike me. But the man refused to strike him. Then he said to him, Because you have not listened to the voice of Jehovah, as soon as you depart from me, the lion will strike you down. And when he had departed from him, the lion found him and struck him down. Then he found another man and said, Strike me. And the man struck him violently and wounded him. And the prophet departed and waited for the king by the way, and he disguised himself with a bandage over his eyes. And when the king passed by, he cried out to the king and said, Your servant went out into the midst of the battle, and then a man turned aside and brought another man to me and said, Guard this man, if he is missing at all, your life will be for his life, or you will pay a talent of silver. And because your servant was doing things here and there, he got away. And the king of Israel said to him, So be your judgment, you have determined it yourself. Then he quickly took the bandage away from over his eyes, and the king of Israel recognized that he was one of the prophets. And he said to him, Thus says Jehovah, Because you have released out of your hand the man whom I had devoted to destruction, your life shall be for his life, and your people for his people. And the king of Israel went to his house sullen and vexed, and he came to Samaria.